So the Fed's latest move shows a cautious stance on rate cuts amid rising inflation, global tensions and political undercurrents. Let's head to Adelaide now. We're joined by David Scutt from StoneX. Great to see you. Talk to us about the Fed's revised forecast. What do they tell us about its confidence in the US economy?
G'day, Aaron. Great to be back. Confidence is probably not the right word at the moment. Certainly the latest set of updates they put through with their forecast are very stagflationary in nature. Of course, they left the Fed funds rate unchanged at a range of 4.25 to 4.5%. But it's the forecasts that get a lot of the attention when there's no expected rate change. And we're expecting expectations for slower growth, higher inflation, higher unemployment. And that's back on what we saw 3 months ago, which was exactly the same. So they're getting more confident that we're looking at a stagflationary environment.
Yeah, he made some pretty strong comments there. So inflation and jobless rates set to rise. Businesses are struggling with higher costs and also signalling a cautious Fed approach. Why the caution, do you think? Why now?
Clearly, there's a lot of uncertainty out there at the moment, not only what's going on with the tariff side, but of course, more recently, what's going on in the Middle East and what's happening with energy prices. So I can understand. But the one thing that really struck me as well is whilst the Fed signaled that they're likely to go and continue to cutting rates this year, 2 more cuts still penciled in, unchanged from what we saw 3 months ago. It's further along, back into next year and then in 2027. They only have 1 cut now priced into what their expectations are as a broad group. Now, they had 2 for each of those years previously. So clearly they think there's going to be not a lot of need to go and cut rates aggressively in this environment, despite this threat out there. And to me, that's going to be the real nexus point, because markets don't believe them at this point in time. Markets are expecting that the Fed will have to go and cut more than what it's signaling right now.
And can you explain what restrictive policy means when it comes to this current context?
So restrictive policy, basically where the level of interest rates sit and what it does to economic activity and inflation. So at the moment, it's what's called mildly restrictive territory. So what it's doing, it's trying to put a bit of a handbrake on economic growth, and that's to go and bring inflation down and maybe go and take some of the heat out of the labour market. Given the backdrop at the moment, and they're talking about that stagflationary pulse, they still don't have the Fed funds rate getting back to what's deemed neutral level, where you've got unemployment steady and inflation steady. So they're still seeing the need to go and keep restrictive policy in place, which is really unusual. This graphic you can see on your screen is tracking data surprises in the United States. On the left-hand side, we have inflation data surprises. They are undershooting at the moment at rates not seen in more than a decade. And economic data more broadly in the United States is now undershooting expectations at rates not seen since back when the Fed began its easing cycle in the middle of last year. So all the evidence is accumulating to suggest, well, hang on, we're talking about potential for this inflationary pulse from tariffs to come through. But all the evidence to date is saying that the Fed should probably start cutting rates and cut rates pretty soon. So that tension is going to have to come out and play out at some point. Unless we see those tariff-induced increases come through, the Fed is likely going to have to go and start cutting rates again.
Obviously, tariffs feel like yesterday's story now. Even Trump decided to flee Canada just as those leaders wanted to talk to him about trade and tariffs, because it's all about the Middle East. How do you see global conflicts actually affecting inflation in Australia?
Yeah, and that's going to be the really important factor. How long is this energy price spike in particular going to last? You talk about how the situation is evolving all the time at the moment as well. We've seen some headlines out from Vladimir Putin only in the past hour or so, being very, very conciliatory towards the United States and saying that he wants to go and discuss a peace deal in Ukraine. That's a positive when it comes to lower petrol prices and energy prices. But at the same time, we've got what's happening in the Middle East right now. This is where the rubber's going to hit the road for us motorists here in Australia. This is the Singapore gasoline wholesale price, and it's been priced in Aussie dollar terms. And you can see from the lows that we saw set back in April, it's now up 30%, which means at the bowser, rather than the top of the price cycle being somewhere in maybe the high 160s, 170s, it's going to be back towards $2 a litre, unfortunately.
I mean, look, we all remember the federal election, and the whole concept from the opposition was 25 cents, but it has been jumping around. I mean, you see it for $1.49, then you see it for $2.19. I mean, it's just jumping around so much. Let's talk about Australia's jobs data. How do you think it might steer the RBA's next move?
Look, first and foremost, it's an incredibly volatile release. But today we've got the markets looking for an increase in employment of 25,000 and the unemployment rate sitting at 4.1%. That's unchanged from a month earlier. The markets are very, very confident that the RBA is going to go and keep cutting rates into next month. You can see here currently pricing more than 80% probability, which means that today's report is pretty important. If we don't go and see some further softening in the labour market, it might go and create a few doubts as to whether the RBA will go and cut at this reading. It might go and skip and wait to the next meeting where it's got its forecasts coming out. At the moment, we'll keep an eye on what happens, but right now it's pretty obvious what's going on in the labour market is that employment growth is slowing. If we start to go and see participation levels stay at these levels as well, that points to higher unemployment.
Who's got the toughest job at the moment, Michelle Bullock or Jerome Powell?
Jerome Powell, totally. There is no contest in that front. I know every central banker at this point in time has got a pretty tough job given the uncertainty that exists, both from a geopolitical perspective and from a trade perspective as well. But yeah, Jerome Powell has that added pressure of Donald Trump. And of course, he's renowned for saying, "You're fired." He can't do it right now, but Jerome Powell is, I know his term's going to end.
He wants
in May
to, though,
next
doesn't
year.
he? You can tell he wants to, everything he says, but then when he threatens the markets collapse, and he says, all right, I won't do it.
He will, and that's going to be the really interesting thing because he's got to go and put a new Federal Reserve appointee in place at some point in the near future. And then what that person starts to go and talk about when it comes to the rates outlook is going to supersede what Powell says. So we're going to have this transition before the actual changeover takes place. And that's going to be very, very interesting for how markets going to perceive what this new appointee is going to do. Will he go and appease Trump, cut rates aggressively? And what will that mean when it comes to the faith in the US government to go and service its longer dated debt? That's another story, of course.
Well, it'll keep us occupied at least. David Scott from StoneX, always appreciate your insights. Thanks for dropping by.
Great to be here.